A heart remembers what eternity tries to forget. The gravedigger's shovel struck frozen earth with a sound like breaking bone. November rain fell in sheets across the cemetery of Père Lachaise, each drop a small mercy against the wound of the world. Lucien watched from beneath the stone archway, his hybrid blood burning cold in his veins, the curse and gift of being neither fully mortal nor fully immortal. 23 years old, and he had already buried more innocents than most men buried in a lifetime. The funeral was sparse. 7 figures in black, their faces turned away from the descending coffin as if ashamed to witness what death demands. They did not know the body inside had been a boy of 18. They did not know his name was Gabriel. They did not know that Gabriel's father, the vampire king of the Eastern Territories, had ordered his own son's death because Gabriel had chosen mortality, had chosen love over eternity. Lucien stepped forward, his footfalls silent on the wet stone. He was neither mourner nor mourned. The dhampir existed in the margins, the spaces between resurrection and decay. His father, a vampire lord of 3 centuries, had loved a mortal woman once. The consequence was Lucien, a creature who could walk in daylight, but felt the sun like acid, who could eat human food but tasted only ash, who could love but knew that love would eventually demand him to choose, remain mortal, and watch everyone he cherished turn to dust or cross into darkness and lose his soul in increments. "Stop," he whispered, though his voice carried the weight of command. The gravediggers froze, their shovels suspended mid-air. They could not see him clearly. Dhampirs bent light around themselves, a trick of blood and survival. But they felt him. They always felt him. The coffin lay open beneath the November sky. Inside, Gabriel's body was pale as porcelain, his lips stained with the residue of vampire wine, the blood ritual that should have sealed him into eternal sleep. His hands were folded across his chest, and in one pale fist he clutched a dried rose. Lucien knelt beside the grave and pressed his hand to Gabriel's sternum. There, a rhythm so faint it might have been the earth's own heartbeat, but Lucien's hybrid blood knew the difference. Gabriel was not dead. He was suspended, caught in the liminal space between mortality and transformation, the exact moment where the vampire kiss becomes choice instead of curse. "His heart still beats," Lucien said aloud, and the rain seemed to pause, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The gravediggers stepped back. One made a sign against evil, but Lucien did not move. He had come to this cemetery following a thread of intuition that only dhampirs possessed, the ability to sense when death was being performed as a lie. Gabriel's father, the vampire king, had not ordered his son's death out of cruelty. He had ordered it out of mercy. He was giving Gabriel a choice that would be honored in the one place no vampire could follow, the sacred earth. If Gabriel woke, when Gabriel woke, he would wake fully transformed, fully himself, and his father would have no claim over him. Vampires born of choice could not be enslaved. Only those turned against their will remained servants to their makers. Lucien lifted Gabriel's body with impossible gentleness. The boy weighed nothing, or perhaps it was the rain that made him weightless, or perhaps it was Lucien's heart recognizing something in this moment that transcended the boundaries of flesh and time. Gabriel had chosen love. That was why his father had let him die into immortality rather than force him to live as a slave. The gravediggers did not stop him. They watched as the dhampir carried the not-quite-dead boy away from the grave, away from the cemetery, into the November night where the rain tasted of mercy and consequence. Behind them, The rose fell from Gabriel's hand and landed on the frozen ground, red as blood, delicate as memory. In his arms, Lucien felt Gabriel's heart accelerate. The transformation was beginning. Soon the boy would wake to a hunger that had no name, a thirst that would define the rest of eternity, and a truth that would reshape everything he believed about love. That sometimes the greatest redemption arrives wearing the face of damnation. The apartment was a cathedral of silence. Lucien had carried Gabriel to an abandoned monastery on the outskirts of Paris, where stone walls held centuries of prayers like wine holds fermentation. Now, as dawn approached, he sat vigil beside the boy's body, still not quite alive, not yet fully awakened. Gabriel's transformation was incomplete. This was the danger of the ritual his father had chosen. The half-death, the suspended moment, left too long could trap a soul between worlds, conscious but frozen, aware but powerless. Lucien had seen it before. It was a form of torture disguised as mercy. He pressed a cloth soaked in cold water against Gabriel's forehead. The boy's skin was translucent now, veins mapping continents of change beneath the surface. His fingers twitched occasionally, as if reaching for something in a dream. What did he dream? What does a soul experience when it stands at the threshold between two eternities? "Come back," Lucien whispered, and his voice cracked in a way that surprised him. Dhampirs were not supposed to break. They were supposed to be witnesses, observers, the neutral ground between two warring natures. But Lucien had never been particularly good at neutrality. He had been 17 when he first understood his curse. His mother, human, beautiful, fragile, had died in childbirth. His father, the vampire who had loved her so fiercely that he had defied the laws of his own kind, had held Lucien for exactly 3 minutes before walking into the morning sun. Some say the vampire lord had been seeking death. Lucien knew better. His father had been seeking mercy, the mercy of not having to watch his hybrid son grow older while remaining ageless, the mercy of not having to witness the day when paternity became tragedy. So Lucien had learned early, love and damnation were not opposites. They were twins, and they wore the same face. Gabriel's eyes flickered open at dawn. The iris was entirely black now, not the dark brown it had been in life, but an absolute black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish pulled from water. Then his voice came, rasping and desperate. "I'm burning." "I know," Lucien said, and he did know. The hunger of a newly transformed vampire was not metaphorical. It was fire. It was thirst that made the Sahara seem like an ocean. It was the body's violent demand to consume what it could no longer be. Lucien produced a vial of blood, synthetic, purchased from a black market dealer in the Marais district who asked no questions. Gabriel's eyes went wider, fixed on the vial like a man dying of thirst finding water. He reached for it, but Lucien pulled it back. "Not yet," he said. "First, you need to understand what you've become." "I'm a monster," Gabriel whispered. "You're transformed," Lucien corrected. "There's a difference. A monster is what you become when you stop choosing. As long as you choose, as long as you decide every moment whether to consume or to preserve, you remain human. You remain capable of redemption." Gabriel looked at him then, really looked at him, and something flickered in those black eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of gratitude. "Who are you?" Gabriel asked. "Someone who understands that the line between salvation and damnation is thinner than a heartbeat," Lucien said. "My name is Lucien. I'm half of what you're becoming, and half of what you were. I exist in the space between. I came to the cemetery because I sensed your father's mercy, and I knew you would need a guide through what comes next. He gave Gabriel the vial of blood. The boy drank it in one motion, and the relief that washed across his face was almost spiritual in its intensity. For a moment, the burning receded. For a moment, he was simply a boy again, exhausted, confused, grateful. My father wanted me dead, Gabriel said, not as a question. Your father wanted you free, Lucian corrected. He could not let you go as a human. The laws of his kind would not permit it. So he gave you death as a doorway. What you do on the other side of that doorway is entirely your choice. Gabriel's hand trembled as he set down the empty vial. What if I don't choose well? What if I become what the myths say? What if I become hunger itself? Lucian sat beside him on the stone floor of the monastery, and in the pre-dawn light filtering through the broken windows, his own duality became visible, the faint luminescence of his vampire blood mixing with the warm gold of his human skin. Then I'll remind you what you chose to live for, Lucian said. You died for love, Gabriel. That doesn't disappear just because your heart stopped beating. It transforms. It becomes the center of everything you are now. The hunger will come, yes. The thirst will scream. But love, true love, is louder. Outside, the bells of a distant church began to toll, and Gabriel flinched at the sound. The sun was rising. In a few hours it would crest the horizon, and Gabriel would feel for the first time the ancient dread that all vampires know, the terror of daylight, the instinct to flee underground. But for now, in this liminal moment between night and dawn, Lucien took Gabriel's hand. And Gabriel did not pull away. The basement of the monastery became their sanctuary. Lucian had learned centuries of secrets through his father's bloodline, how to survive in the margins, how to construct a life from scraps and shadows. He taught Gabriel how to move through the world invisible, how to read the hunger in his own veins before it became consuming, how to find meaning in the small mercies that eternity offers. 3 weeks passed. Gabriel's transformation stabilized. His black eyes began to hold flecks of color again. Not human, never human, but something new. Something that had never existed before. He was no longer the boy who had died for love. He was becoming something else, a vampire who remembered what it meant to choose. They spoke little of Gabriel's father, but the absence of conversation was its own dialogue. The vampire king had released his son into the world, and in doing so, had cut all ties. To the immortal hierarchies, Gabriel was now a rogue, transformed outside the sanctioned rituals, carrying no maker's mark, bound by no blood oath. In the eyes of the vampire elite, he was contaminated. And yet, Lucian noticed, Gabriel wore this status like a secret strength. One night, as they sat in the monastery's upper chamber, where moonlight poured through stained glass like liquid jewels, Gabriel asked the question that had been building beneath all their conversations. Do you regret what you are? Lucien considered this. The moon turned his dhampir blood silver beneath his skin. He could feel both answers in him, the human part that ached with loneliness, and the vampire part that hungered for something beyond sustenance. Regret implies I had a choice, he said finally. But sometimes I wonder what I might have become if I'd been born fully one thing or the other. Would it have been simpler? Yes. Would it have been better? No. The margin is where you learn to see both sides. My father, Gabriel began but stopped. Your father chose to lose everything to give you freedom, Lucian finished. That's not regret, that's sacrifice. Gabriel stood and walked to the window. Below, Paris spread out like a circuit board of lights, each one a human life, burning briefly and then extinguishing. He placed his hand against the glass, and frost spread from his fingertips, the cold of eternal night radiating from even his smallest gestures. "I dream of her," Gabriel said quietly. "The girl I chose this for. I can't remember her face anymore. It's been only 3 weeks, and already the human memory is fading. Soon I'll forget her entirely, and all of this death, this hunger, this loneliness, will have been for nothing." Lucien felt the truth of this like a blade between his ribs. It was the cruelest mercy of vampiric existence, that the things you died for become dim, then dimmer, until eventually even the love that transformed you becomes a ghost you no longer recognize. "Then you have to choose to remember," Lucien said. "Carry something of hers. A name, a color she loved, the way light fell on her hair. Don't let the hunger take that from you. Every vampire I've ever known who remained capable of redemption was one who chose to remember what made them human." Gabriel turned from the window, and in his black eyes, Lucien saw something that frightened him, the beginning of acceptance. Gabriel was beginning to understand that his tragedy had become his foundation. He was beginning to make peace with what he'd chosen. "There's something I need to tell you," Lucien said, and he felt the words pull at something deep inside him. "Something I've known since the moment I carried you from your grave." Gabriel waited. "Your heart still beats," Lucien said, "not the metaphorical heart of a vampire, the cold, calculating machine that most immortals cultivate. I mean your actual heart, Gabriel, the human one. It's still in there, still beating, because part of you never fully died. Your father's ritual was incomplete on purpose. He wanted to give you something the rest of us never had, the ability to choose love over hunger, moment after moment, forever. As long as that heart keeps beating, you have that choice." Gabriel's hand moved to his chest, and he seemed to listen to himself for the first time since his transformation. And yes, there it was. Beneath the vampire cold, beneath the endless hunger, beneath the black eyes and the white skin and all the markers of damnation, a human heartbeat, steady and insistent, refusing to fade. "What do I do with this?" Gabriel whispered. "You survive the night," Lucien said. "Again and again. You survive the night. And every time you choose mercy over hunger, every time you refuse to become the monster the world expects, that's when you redeem not just yourself, but every immortal who came before you and wasted their eternity on cruelty." Outside, the bells of the city churches began to toll midnight, and in the monastery's upper chamber, 2 creatures who belonged nowhere sat in silence, a half-vampire and a fully transformed man, sharing the weight of a redemption that neither of them had asked for, but both had chosen. "And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you." The rose appeared on the monastery's altar without explanation. It was red, impossibly vibrant in that place of shadow and stone, and it was fresh, not the dried, withered thing that had fallen from Gabriel's hand in the cemetery. Lucien found it first, on a morning when he was preparing the sanctuary for Gabriel's waking. He lifted it carefully, his dhampir senses immediately alert. The scent was wrong, too new, too alive. No human had left this. It had come from vampire hands. When Gabriel emerged from his sleeping chamber as dusk fell, Lucien showed him the rose without speaking. Gabriel's black eyes fixed on it with an intensity that made the air around him crystallize with cold. "My father," Gabriel said. It was not a question. Over the following nights, more objects appeared. A leather journal with pages filled in the Vampire King's handwriting, meditations on sacrifice, on the burden of watching those you love choose mortality, on the loneliness of eternal rule. A silver ring inscribed with words in Romani. "The heart remembers what the crown forgets." A photograph, aged and yellowed, of a woman with Gabriel's eyes, his mother perhaps, or a memory the Vampire King carried. Each object was a conversation without words. Each one was an apology written in the language only immortals could read. Gabriel studied the journal late one night, his transformed hands trembling slightly as he turned each page. Lucien watched from across the monastery's main chamber, giving him space for grief that had no name, for the reconciliation of loving a father who had destroyed him to save him. "He says here that he watched me for 3 years," Gabriel said, his voice hollow. "Every night, from the shadows outside my window. He knew about the girl. He knew I was dying, not physically but spiritually. The slow death of a human who realizes his existence has become meaningless. He knew that I would choose death over continuing to live as a shadow. So he gave you the death that would transform you," Lucien said softly. "He gave you the choice that no other vampire lord would permit." "He broke every law of his kind to do it," Gabriel continued, reading deeper into the journal. "He's written here about the council that confronted him. They demanded he either reclaim me as a proper fledgling or execute me as an abomination. He refused both. He said, 'My son chose this death. I will not diminish his choice by making him a slave to my making, and I will not steal from him the possibility of redemption by erasing him entirely.'" Gabriel looked up from the journal, and Lucien saw tears, actual tears, still somehow present in a creature that should have transcended such human expressions. "They've marked him for death," Gabriel whispered, "for defying the council, for refusing to police his own son, for believing in something they consider weakness, that love, even love for a vampire, is worth more than power." Lucien moved to Gabriel's side, and together they stood in the candlelit monastery, surrounded by the evidence of a father's sacrifice. "We have to go to him," Gabriel said. "That would be suicide," Lucien replied. "The council would destroy you both. They would make an example." "Then let them," Gabriel said, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had already chosen to die once. "My father chose me over his throne. I'll be damned if I don't at least try to save him." Lucien understood then that this was the real test. It wasn't whether Gabriel could resist the hunger, whether he could maintain his humanity in the face of eternity. The real test was whether he could choose others over himself, whether his father's sacrifice would inspire more sacrifice, or whether he would break the cycle. "If we go," Lucien said carefully, "we go prepared. The council has rules. If we can invoke the ancient laws, the ones that predate even the Vampire King's reign, we might have a chance. There's a thing called the trial of mercy. It hasn't been invoked in 2 centuries. But if Gabriel can prove that his father's actions were driven by love rather than weakness, if he can prove that his own continued existence is a form of redemption rather than contamination, then," Gabriel pressed. "Then the council must vote," Lucien finished, and we pray that even among immortals there exists some memory of what it means to love. Gabriel placed the rose carefully in his coat pocket, close to his heart. And as he did, Lucien noticed something that made his dhampir blood sing with recognition. Gabriel's heart, that impossible human heart that still beat within his vampire body, had accelerated with hope rather than hunger. He was beginning to understand that immortality was not about duration. It was about purpose. And Gabriel's purpose had just become as clear as the red rose blooming in the darkness. Save the Father who had saved him, or die trying. The monastery bells tolled as they prepared to leave, and somewhere in the night, the vampire king felt the shift in his son's blood. The moment when a boy who had died for love became a man willing to die for it again. The vampire king's fortress was built into the cliffs of Romania, where no sunlight ever touched the stone and the wind carried the screams of centuries. Lucien had never been here, though his father had spoken of it, the seat of immortal power, the place where the laws of darkness were written and enforced. His dhampir blood thrummed with recognition as they approached, as if responding to a call encoded in his very cells. Gabriel walked beside him without fear. This was the difference between a vampire created in desperation and one born into duty. Gabriel had nothing to lose because he had already lost everything. He had died. He had been buried and abandoned. Anything that came now was resurrection. They were met at the gates by the council's sentries, ancient vampires, their faces carved by centuries of watching and waiting. They did not attempt to stop Gabriel and Lucien. They knew what it meant when a fledgling walked openly toward the council chambers. It meant someone was invoking ancient law. The council room was vast, a cathedral of darkness lit only by the endless flames of 100 candles. 9 figures sat in judgment, their faces obscured by shadow and age. At the center of the chamber, restrained by chains that glowed with sacred silver, was the vampire king, Gabriel's father. He looked diminished, not in body, but in spirit. Lucien could see the exhaustion of someone who had spent weeks defending a choice that the immortal world considered insane. "Gabriel," the vampire king said, and his voice cracked across the single word like a whip striking marble. "You should not have come. They will destroy you." "Then let them," Gabriel replied, and he stepped forward into the light of the candles. "I invoke the trial of mercy. I claim the right to defend the actions of my Maker under the ancient laws that predate your council." A silence fell over the chamber. One of the council members leaned forward, and when she spoke, her voice was like ice breaking over deep water. "The trial of mercy has not been invoked in 217 years. You understand that to invoke it is to accept judgment not just on your father's actions, but on your own right to exist? To argue mercy in a room filled with immortals who have forgotten what mercy means." "I understand," Gabriel said. "Then speak," the council member commanded. "Defend the indefensible. Explain how an immortal lord can justify releasing his own fledgling into the world unmade, untaught, unmarked by his power. Explain how this is anything other than abandonment disguised as philosophy." Gabriel took a breath, a human gesture, unnecessary for a vampire, but meaningful in its deliberateness. "My father did not abandon me," Gabriel began, and his voice filled the vast chamber with a clarity that made the candle flames lean toward him. "He released me from a slavery that I had not yet begun to understand. In your world, I would have become his property. My hunger would have been his to control. My immortal existence would have been defined by his will and the will of this council. Yes, he left me in darkness. But he also left me with choice. One of the council members stirred impatiently, but Gabriel continued. I was dying when my father chose to transform me, not of any disease you would recognize, but of meaninglessness. I had lived as a human, and I had discovered that human life was too fragile for the love I carried. My heart was too large for my mortality. My father recognized this. He understood that I could not survive as I was, and that to force me to continue would be a crueler death than any transformation could be. Lucian watched the council members' faces, looking for any sign of yielding. But immortals were difficult to move. They had so much time for their cruelty, so much practice in their indifference. He broke the laws of your hierarchy, Gabriel continued, because those laws were written to perpetuate control, not to protect. He believed, and I believe, that love cannot be enslaved, that redemption cannot be mandated, that a vampire created in freedom might choose mercy where one created in bondage would choose hunger. Philosophical poetry, another council member said coldly. It does not change the fact that your father violated the sacred code, that he created an abomination. I am not an abomination, Gabriel interrupted, and his voice carried the weight of finality. I am a choice made manifest. I am what happens when a vampire refuses to become a monster. I am what redemption looks like when it's given a fighting chance. The Vampire King's eyes closed. In that moment, Lucian saw what immortality had cost him. The pain of watching his own son stand in judgment, fighting for his life, willing to die again if it meant saving the man who had already let him die once. The trial of mercy requires consensus, the eldest council member said finally. We must vote on whether this fledgling's defense has merit, whether his father's actions, though prohibited, were driven by a love worthy of consideration. What followed was the longest silence Lucian had ever experienced. He could hear the individual breathing of all 9 council members, the crackle of the eternal candles, the faint echo of the wind outside the fortress. One by one, they voted. 6-1 in favor of the council's judgment against the Vampire King. 2 abstaining. The sentence stands, the council announced. The Vampire King will be stripped of his title and released into the world as a rogue. His fledgling will be marked as contaminated and hunted by all who serve the council. And you. They turned to Lucien. The dhampir who assisted in this transgression will be considered an enemy to all vampire kind. Gabriel moved to his father's side and broke the silver chains with his bare hands. The metal melted under the heat of his defiant blood. Then we are enemies together, Lucien said quietly, and we are free. As they turned to leave, the Vampire King placed his hand on Gabriel's shoulder. What you did, the old vampire said, was transform a death into a resurrection. I failed to protect you from my world. You chose to protect me from theirs. That is a reversal I never expected to witness. Outside, in the Romanian night, they became what the council had made them. Outlaws bound by love instead of law, warriors of redemption in a world that had forgotten how to forgive. The river where they made their camp was gray with age and secrets. They had traveled south, away from the council's territories, toward the margins where immortals went when the world had no use for them. Lucien prepared shelter in an abandoned mill, while Gabriel and his father spoke for the first time in the freedom of their shared exile. Lucien did not listen to their conversation. Some words are sacred, meant only for the ears of those who have lived them. But he could see them in the moonlight, the Vampire King's ancient face, finally revealing the weight it had carried, Gabriel's younger features softening with understanding that went beyond forgiveness. 3 days into their exile, Gabriel found Lucien sitting alone by the river's edge. "I need to tell you something," Gabriel said, and there was a new gravity to him now, the gravity of someone who had been tested and survived. "Something about why you found me in that cemetery." Lucien turned to look at him. "My father didn't choose the cemetery by accident," Gabriel continued. "He knew that dhampirs are drawn to incomplete transformations. He knew that you, specifically, would sense the incompleteness of my death. He was counting on you to find me." "Then he was counting on my nature," Lucien said slowly. "On the fact that I exist in margins and am drawn to others who do." "More than that," Gabriel said. "He wanted you to guide me through this because he knew I would need someone who understood both sides. Someone who had lived the question of whether redemption was possible without becoming fully one thing or the other." Lucien felt something shift in his chest, not his heart, which beat with a rhythm that was neither human nor vampire, but something deeper, a recognition of purpose, a confirmation that perhaps his entire existence, his loneliness, his curse of existing between two worlds, had been preparation for this moment. "Your father is wise," Lucien said finally. "He's also sorry," Gabriel replied. "He's been trying to understand how to make peace with having loved you into a sentence of eternal wandering. He knows that by using you, by drawing you into this, he's bound you to our fate. A dhampir's loyalty, once given, is permanent." "I know," Lucien said. And he did know. He had felt it the moment he lifted Gabriel from that grave, the moment when his entire existence became about protecting this impossible boy who had chosen love so fiercely that even death could not diminish it. That night, the three of them sat together as the moon rose over the Romanian wilderness. The vampire king told them stories of centuries past, of empires that had risen and fallen while he remained constant, of loves he had loved and lost, of the slow process by which an immortal learns that duration is not the same as living. "I created an empire because I could not create meaning," the old vampire said. "I built power because I could not build peace. I enslaved my own kind because I feared the alternative, admitting that none of us know why we exist or what we're supposed to do with forever." "That's changing," Gabriel said, and he took his father's ancient hand. "That's what we're creating now, a different way of being immortal, one where love is stronger than law and redemption is always possible." Lucien listened and understood that this was the real transformation happening. Not the physical change from human to vampire, but the ideological shift. 3 outcasts, bound by love and exile, were beginning to imagine a different immortality than the one the council had enforced for millennia. "There's something the council feared about your father," Lucien said thoughtfully. "Something that made them sentence him so harshly. They didn't fear his defiance as much as they feared what his defiance might inspire. If other vampires learned that immortals could choose love over power, choose redemption over dominion, the entire hierarchy would collapse." "Good," the vampire king said, and for the first time, Lucien heard laughter in his voice. Not the laughter of cruelty or amusement, but the laughter of genuine liberation. "Let it collapse. Perhaps what replaces it will be better. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts." They built a sanctuary in the mountains, in a place where no council law reached and no hunter would think to look. It was not a fortress, as the council would have imagined it, but a home, a place where the 3 of them could exist without pretense or hierarchy. Lucian discovered that his dhampir nature, rather than isolating him, had prepared him to be a bridge between the Vampire King's ancient world and Gabriel's new existence. He taught Gabriel the skills of survival that dhampirs knew, how to move through both day and darkness, how to read the hunger without being consumed by it, how to find sustenance without becoming corrupted by the hunt. And Gabriel, in turn, taught them both something neither had known they needed, that love could be active, could be a practice, could be something you chose again and again, instead of something that simply happened to you. Months passed. Word began to spread through the underground networks of immortals, whispered in the dark places where vampires gathered. A fledgling and his father and a dhampir were living without fear of the council. They were creating something new. And more than that, they were showing it was possible. One night, another vampire arrived at their sanctuary. She was young, maybe 30 in apparent age, and her eyes held the fresh agony of a recent transformation. "I was created in chains," she told them after Lucian had welcomed her in. "By a master who wanted to use me. I heard about you, about a father who gave his son freedom. I needed to know if it was real." And Gabriel, who might have turned her away, instead took her hand. "It's real," he said. "Come rest. Tomorrow we can talk about what freedom means when you've been bound so long that the chains feel like skin." More came after her. A vampire who had been tortured for refusing to participate in a hunt. A fledgling who had tried to resist the hunger and been punished for it. A creature who had spent 2 centuries in emotional slavery and finally found the courage to escape. They came to the sanctuary in the mountains, and Gabriel never turned anyone away. The Vampire King watched this transformation with something approaching wonder. "You've become what I could never be," he told his son one night. "A leader not of empire, but of exodus, an architect of freedom rather than dominion." "I learned from watching you choose love over power," Gabriel replied. "You showed me it was possible. I'm simply extending that choice to others." But Lucian could see the strain building, the way the Vampire King's ancient body was beginning to fail under the weight of guilt he carried. As immortals aged beyond certain points, they didn't die, but they diminished. They became hollow shells, powerful but empty, their centuries of existence turning into centuries of regret. He found the old vampire in the sanctuary's highest tower one dawn, staring out at the rising sun. "You should not be awake," Lucian said gently. "The sun will harm you." "I'm ready for that," the Vampire King replied. "My immortality has become a burden I can no longer bear. I thought that giving my son freedom would be enough redemption for me, but it's not. There are too many centuries behind me, too much blood, too much suffering I caused that I can never undo." Lucien understood what the old vampire was contemplating, the one mercy that immortals could grant themselves, final rest. "Your son needs you," Lucien said. "No," the Vampire King replied. "Gabriel needs to know that redemption is not just possible but complete. He needs to understand that even after centuries of being a monster, I chose to be better. And I need to prove that choice by stepping aside, by making room for a new kind of immortal to flourish." "If you step into the sun, you'll simply burn," Lucian said. "There's no beauty in that ending." "Then what do you suggest?" the Vampire King asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his ancient eyes. Lucien considered this, the weight of it, the impossible nature of the request. And then he understood. You could become what I am, Lucian said quietly. A dhampir. If you drank my blood and allowed the transformation to take hold, your vampire essence would merge with my human strain. You would lose your immortal power, but you would gain something else. A second mortality. A chance to live a human lifespan again, knowing it would end. Knowing that you would not be around forever to regret your choices. The Vampire King was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, a smile that held centuries of longing. Yes, he said simply. I choose that. When Gabriel found them, the transformation was nearly complete. Lucian had given his blood freely, and the Vampire King's ancient body was reshaping itself, becoming something new and fragile and mortal in ways he had not been since his own transformation into immortality. What did you do? Gabriel asked, fear in his black eyes. I gave your father a gift, Lucian said, the gift of an ending, of a life that will eventually conclude and a rest that will finally come. The Vampire King, no longer a king, becoming something simpler and more human every moment, reached for his son's hand. I am sorry, he said, and these words meant everything. Apology for the sacrifice, for the loss, for the immortal isolation that he had created and perpetuated for so many centuries. But I am no longer sorry for loving you. 5 years passed. The sanctuary had grown into something unexpected, not a sanctuary from the council, but a sanctuary for transformation. Vampires who wanted to be something other than predators came to learn. Some stayed, some left to build their own communities of mercy. The work was quiet, incremental, and utterly revolutionary. The Vampire King, now called only Mikhail, aged as humans age. His black vampire eyes returned slowly to blue. His white skin took on the warmth of someone who could walk in daylight again. And bit by bit, he reclaimed a humanity that he had thought lost forever. Gabriel remained as he was, immortal, powerful, but always choosing to use that power to protect rather than dominate. His connection with Lucien deepened beyond friendship, becoming something that transcended the boundaries of how immortals traditionally related to each other. It was love, but a love that existed in the spaces between categories, in the margins where dhampirs and transformed vampires found each other. One night, near the end of Mikhail's human lifespan, the three of them stood together in the sanctuary's highest tower, looking out over the mountains where the stars seemed close enough to touch. I'm afraid, Mikhail said, his now mortal voice trembling slightly with age. I've lived so long as an immortal. I don't know how to die. Neither did I, Gabriel said, but I learned that dying and being reborn is not as difficult as it seems. You simply surrender to the change and trust that what comes next will be worth the letting go. Lucian took Mikhail's hand. You taught me that love could redeem eternity, Lucian said. Let eternity redeem you by finally ending. Your death will not be a failure of your transformation. It will be the completion of it. Mikhail nodded, and in that nod was the acceptance that no immortal had ever managed before. Not resistance to death, but welcome. He died 3 months later, peacefully, with Gabriel and Lucian at his side. And when he died, the red rose that Gabriel had carried for 5 years, the one that never aged, never wilted, finally bloomed one last time before turning to ash in Gabriel's palm. At the funeral, attended by every vampire who had come through the sanctuary, Gabriel stood and spoke words that would echo through the underground immortal networks for centuries. My father taught me that an immortal can choose to become human again. That power can transform into mercy. that a king can become a man, and in that becoming, achieve a nobility that no throne could ever grant. His grave will not be a monument to what he was. It will be a door to what we all might become if we choose to love more than we fear, to redeem more than we dominate. As Gabriel spoke, the sanctuary's eternal candles seemed to burn brighter, and Lucian felt something shift in the fabric of immortal society itself. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. The possibility of change. The acknowledgement that love was not weakness. The beginning of a new mythology for eternity. After the funeral, Lucien and Gabriel stood alone in the tower where Mikhail had chosen his final mortality. "What will you do now?" Gabriel asked. Lucien considered the question. He had spent his entire existence as a witness, as a bridge between two worlds. But perhaps that was not a limitation. Perhaps that was his truest calling, to remain in the margins, to be the one who existed between, to remind immortals that they had once been human and could choose humanity again. "I'll stay," Lucien said. "I'll stay until the last vampire who believes redemption is possible has been saved. And then perhaps I'll die too, and join your father in whatever comes next." Gabriel took his hand, not as a follower takes the hand of a leader, not as a fledgling takes the hand of a maker, but as an equal takes the hand of another equal. As someone who has survived the impossible takes the hand of the one who made that survival possible. Outside, the Romanian mountains held their ancient secrets. Inside, in the tower where a vampire king had chosen mortality and lived to see the beginning of a new age of kindness, two creatures who belonged nowhere found home in each other. And in the darkness below, more candles lit themselves. More seekers would come. More transformations would happen. More redemptions would be born from blood and mercy, from love that refuses to diminish, from the eternal choice to be better than hunger, more powerful than eternity. A heart remembers what immortality tries to forget, that forever is only worth living if someone chooses to live it with you. Comment, eternal, if you'd trade your soul for love that heals.